Hello and welcome to another update. In this one, I'll be covering the latest developments throughout the front line, starting out with the general situation across the front, and that is that it is mostly silent. We see this based on the fact that there are only two areas in which fighting is taking place, and in the direction of Robotina, there's been no actual fighting or developments in this direction. It's just mainly been artillery strikes between the two sides trying to grind out each other's forces. But what we see is that there has been released a video from the Russian side showing a large amount of Ukrainian losses of armored vehicles in the direction of Verbove. So this area is right next to the northwest of Verbove by the northwestern parts right here and down to the main defensive line to the east of that location. So this road between these two locations is littered with Ukrainian armored vehicles lost over the past few weeks of fighting. We see this based on the video which was released by Russian forces. There is counted to be around 24 Ukrainian armored vehicles lost in this section of the front line. This is the results of the weeks of fighting in the direction of Verbove. If we take a look at the colossal losses, because this is colossal losses in the direction of the main defensive line that they have breached but not broken through, it would have been a different situation if they have broken through, but they've only breached the main defensive line. This means that the current situation is still in favor of the Russian forces because they're able to hold on to their positions. The current situation across the front is that the Ukrainian forces have managed to breach and have taken control over some of the trenches to the west of Verbove. If we take a look at the deep state map, we see that the Ukrainian forces have only parts of the fortifications to the west of Verbove, only parts of the trenches. But what they have is actually enough to create some passage through the main defensive line, the anti-tank ditches. The current situation is that the Ukrainian forces is most likely building up their forces for a main final push. As I've been talking about for a very long time, this hasn't happened yet. But what we're seeing is that the Ukrainian forces have largely stopped their attacks over the past few days. This has been reported by many sources, including Deep State Map. If we take a look, there's been no real changes in this part of the front line since the change on the 21st of September, where they gained a bit of ground. Then there was a correction where the Ukrainian forces actually controlled less. And then since then, there's been no actual changes. So the Ukrainian forces have essentially not changed the front line for 6 days now. With this, we see that the Ukrainian forces are likely not launching any more of these assaults. We see based on the losses that the Ukrainian forces have actually used the armored vehicles more than just infantry assaults, but also armored vehicles included, and not just a few, but 24. So with this, we see that the Ukrainian forces are having a very difficult time breaking through Russia's main defensive line. This is why we're seeing that they're most likely building up one big push. The reason for that is if they cannot successfully break through Russia's defensive line, then they don't have enough power. They need to get some sort of result because from the recent United States visit by Zelensky for the United Nations General Assembly, as well as the meeting with the White House and Canada, we see that the Ukrainians have not received any major pledges of support. There's been some steady support and supply for Ukraine, but it is not enough to replace the sort of losses that they are receiving. They are losing men at a rate at which they cannot be replaced, so they need further support. If they need the support, they need to restart an offensive in the next summer, next spring, then they need a lot more units, a lot more equipment, and a lot more soldiers for that. So they need to do some sort of success to motivate and show the West that they can succeed and as such receive more support. With the results of this 4-month offensive, they have hardly gained anything and they've only breached their first main line of defense. With this, it's not enough to show that they're actually able to regain, well, everything, because as we can see, there's hardly a dent in the Russian positions. So with this, the Ukrainian forces need some sort of major success. And they will most likely try to gain that with an armored assault, because they've experienced previously that if they have strong enough forces, then the Russians would just retreat to other positions. But what they're not taking into account is the fact that the Russians are much stronger now and have these major defensive lines, so that same strategy will not work. But it seems that they will try it anyways. They believe that if they launch a strong enough offensive with the Challenger tanks, with the Abrams tanks that just have arrived, and with the Leopard tanks they have left, they may be able to break through. Rather try and fail than not try, knowing that you could have succeeded, is the kind of mentality that they're having right now. If they can try it and they actually succeed, then there they go. They can fight for another year or two. If they fail, then it wouldn't have changed much from if they didn't try at all, because the current rate of attrition for the Ukrainian forces is not sustainable in the long run, and the Russian forces are able to deal with it at a pace and at a rate that the Ukrainians are not able to withstand against. And this hasn't just happened in the direction of Verbove, we also see it in the direction of Andreevka. So we hadn't seen a lot on the Russian perspective of the fighting by Andreevka. We have seen that the Ukrainian forces managed to capture the village, but recently we also got this footage from Andreevka, which also shows large Ukrainian losses in this direction. We see this video here, which has been geolocated by Military Summary. It's about a 3-minute long video, and it shows multiple Ukrainian vehicle losses in the direction of Andreevka. And these are all Ukrainian losses in a recent assault after their capture of the village. So we see, despite their advancements, the Ukrainian forces also try their own armored assaults, similar to the Russian attempted counterattack north of Klishivka. So with this, we see that the Ukrainian forces are not without casualties here either. With this constant attrition across the whole front line, the Ukrainian forces are losing a lot of units every day, similarly to the Russians. But the Ukrainians are losing more because they are on the offensive, and they are hitting their head against the Russian iron wall in the Zaporizhia front. So with this, we see that the Ukrainian forces need some sort of success, otherwise they would have just shown that they have spent 4 months hitting their head against the wall for no results. And that is something that they cannot survive if they want to win this war and get enough support from the Western countries to actually have a fighting chance, because currently they do not have enough support to break through Russia's defensive lines in this Zaporizhia front, much less the ability to fully recapture all of Ukraine's territory. So as I mentioned in the previous video, this sort of push would most likely take place if the Ukrainians are able to destroy the Kerch Bridge, but most likely they'll do it anyways regardless of the assaults down there in the south. We are seeing that the Ukrainian forces are building up whatever forces they have left from the 4 months of attrition to then make a final push before the rainy season starts, so that they're able to attempt some sort of success by the southern front. Finally, we also have to take into account the Russian losses by Crimea. We have seen that the Ukrainians have constantly been attacking the Crimean Peninsula over the past few weeks, and we see that they've actually managed to hit a couple of the Russian fleet, and as well as some ammo depots, oil depots, and so on, communication centers, and deployment zones for Russian military. However, this all in total is not enough to actually put a dent at the Russian front line, because no matter how many ships the Russian fleet loses, it will not change the front. While the other strikes are mostly influential on the front line, at the same time, these are units that are in the rear. If the Ukrainian wants to get most out of their strikes, they would need to hit all of the depots between this whole area, so that they have to restock one at a time. With the current situation, the Ukrainians destroy all of the supplies the Russian forces have in the Crimean Peninsula. It wouldn't change what is currently at the front line, and with the land bridge being the main supply route for Crimea, if they get rid of everything in Crimea, then there would be Crimea having a shortage, not the front line having a shortage, because the Russians can supply from the east. So with this, we can actually see that if the Ukrainians want to get the most out of these strikes in Ukraine, they need to follow up with some sort of assault, whether it be through the Dnieper River or through the river line or from the sea. So essentially what we're seeing is that the Ukrainians are just attacking Crimean positions for PR reasons, not for actual military strategy reasons, because there's no military benefits for the Ukrainian forces to attack Crimea other than destroying Russian fleet, which is hardly affecting the front line. The current objective is blockading the ports by Ukraine, but even if the Russians completely run out of sea vessels, the Russian forces would still be able to blockade it using their own air force or other units. So in the end, what we see is that the Ukrainians are just doing some PR stunts for morale, not for any military reasons. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.